Growing up in a small, rural Vermont town meant that my household didn't have a lot of money, but we still shared everything with our extended family. That included letting my aunt, uncle, and cousin move in with us when they got evicted from their house. Everything was just fine, until the crying started. For 2 years, from age 12 to 14, I had to share my room with my little cousin Katie. It wasn't all bad, since she was close enough to my age that she wasn't a pest, but I hated the blackout curtains we had to hang so that any outside light didn't keep her up at night. I loved seeing the moonlight filter through the screen in the summer, and I missed that once Katie moved in. It was the second year that they had been living with us when the crying began. At first I thought it was just Katie sobbing quietly when she thought I was asleep, which made sense to me because she had just gotten dumped a few days before. I figured she just didn't want to talk because she was either ashamed of being the one that got dumped, or she was still just too heartbroken. Over the next few weeks, however, I began realizing that it was coming from different places within her room at night. I couldn't understand why Katie was continuing to cry so much, and anytime I asked her about it, she just looked scared and shook her head. I thought something else had happened between her and her ex-boyfriend, but she just wouldn't talk to me. I told my mom and aunt about it one night while Katie was at her friend Bree's house, but they just shrugged it off and said that we were going through a rough time. My slightly drunk aunt joked that Katie was probably crying at night because my fashion sense was so bad, and that maybe we should try a nightlight if we were going to be babies. I ignored her and decided that I was done with the whole thing. Things came to a head about a month after I talked to my mom and aunt. I was trying to sleep one night, my CD player earbuds lodged firmly in my ears, when I felt a gentle tug on my pajama top sleeve. I removed the earbuds and turned my face to speak to Katie, even though I couldn't actually see her in the darkness. "What's up?" Instead of an answer, all I got was a sniffle, and before I knew what was happening, Katie had crawled into my bed and curled up next to me. This was so out of character for her that I didn't even question it. I just gently stroked her hair. She quieted down after a bit, and I covered her with my spare blanket because she was so cold. I must have fallen asleep at some point, because I woke up to Katie moving around next to me. She leaned over, her soft whisper barely touching my ears. "Run. The one who got me is coming for you." I had no idea what she meant. I felt her get off the bed, and then everything was still and silent again. I strained my eyes to make her out in the pitch-like darkness, but with the blackout curtains, I couldn't tell where she had gone. "Katie, who's coming? You're creeping me out." She never responded. A primordial growl sliced through the quiet, and a white-hot pain blurred my senses. I screamed as wet, warm liquid ran down my face, and a single hand snaked its way around my throat. I tried to kick out at Katie, but my feet didn't seem to be connecting with anything. The air was rapidly getting squeezed from my lungs, and no matter how hard I tried, it was impossible for me to tear free from this vice-like hand. I was about to pass out when my door was flung open and my father stood there. The hand had released my throat, and after a moment of catching my breath, I realized it was just my father and I in my room. He shouted to my mom to call an ambulance. Then he tried asking me what had happened. I frantically begged him to search the room, but there was no one else there. There wasn't even a closet to hide in, and the window was locked from the inside. I ended up passing out from losing so much blood, and I also lost my left eye that night. The doctors tried to blame it on a mixture of sleep paralysis, nightmares, and accidental self-harm. But at 120 pounds and no muscle, even my parents didn't believe that explanation. We moved out of that house immediately, since none of us felt comfortable there anymore. On the night I lost my eye, Katie came to see me in the intensive care unit as soon as her mom picked her up from her new boyfriend's house. I was almost asleep in bed, and I remember her leaning over and whispering to me, her voice heavy in sorrow. "I'm so sorry, cuz I wish I could have been there to help you." Even in my drug-induced, mostly asleep state, it struck me that her whisper didn't sound at all like the one that tried to warn me about the attack. I never had another strange experience again, and when we moved, I even got my own room. Since then, I never fail to make sure there's some sort of light on in the room, and on those rare nights when I hear crying, I always make sure to leave the house for a while. Since I was 5 years old, I've been a fan of the Pokemon games, even to the point where I once had a dog named Growlithe and a cat named Espeon. I've played every iteration of the game, and I can beat any one of them, even if I'm running a Nuzlocke challenge. Pokemon was my favorite pastime, until about a month ago. I was replaying Blue for about the 15th time after work one day, and I had just gotten to Lavender Town. The creepy music has always unsettled me, and I like to get out of the town as quickly as possible once I deal with the tower and find the Sylph Scope. I needed to meet up with a friend for drinks, so I saved the game and shut my Game Boy off. A few days later, I was playing Fortnite Save the World when the Lavender Town music came on. I was focused on getting a specific kill when my headphones were bombarded with static-filled music, and it caused an instant headache. The noise blared over my PS4, and hearing the jarring notes was so painfully loud that I actually screamed. Even through the buzzing in my ears, I recognized the tune, and it made no sense. Fortnite had music, sure, but nothing like the melancholy notes that most people born in the 90s are familiar with. I shut the console off immediately, taking the headphones off so fast that I ripped a few strands of hair out of my head. There were no other sounds in my apartment. A piece of me had tried to rationalize that maybe, in some weird domino effect, I had accidentally turned my Game Boy on, and the music was stemming from that. I reasoned that this explanation would make perfect sense, mainly because I knew that I had saved my game in that exact town earlier in the week. However, I also knew that my Game Boy was in my nightstand, which was nowhere near my PS4. Additionally, I was aware that even if I had somehow managed to turn it on, the music wouldn't have been able to project through my headphones without being plugged into the device. None of that made sense. But just to be sure, I rifled through my bedside drawer until I found the Game Boy. Not only was it turned off, but the batteries were completely dead. I nervously thrust the machine back into my nightstand, making a beeline for the bathroom so I could take some Advil. Maybe I was just getting sick, and the illness was causing some sort of disorienting side effect. Or else it could just be my brain tweaking out from playing too many video games. I let the whole odd episode go after about 20 minutes, chalking it up to being overly tired and stressed due to working a double the day before. I couldn't keep dwelling on it. I knew it would drive me crazy if I kept focusing on the strange musical outburst. That night, I even dreamt about the music, and I swear that I woke up once and was actually hearing it. Things just got worse as the weeks wore on. I didn't touch my Game Boy again, and I even let my younger cousin borrow it for a while so that it was out of my apartment. I almost thought things were getting better, until last night. On Halloween night, I woke up in the middle of a dream, quickly realizing that the Lavender Town theme was what had awoken me after trickling down into my subconscious. I blinked slowly, my brain taking a moment to register that I wasn't actually dreaming, and then I jolted up in surprise. My hands were covered in blood, and it took me 15 minutes of frantically checking my body for me to realize that the dried crimson fluid wasn't mine. I was shaking so hard that I could barely walk, but I journeyed from my bedroom and crossed my living room to get to the kitchen sink. I had just finished washing my hands, my heart still pounding with fear, when I heard a noise outside. I couldn't tell what the sound was, so I cautiously tiptoed over to the veranda doorway and shakily peeked out the curtain. In the dim moonlight, I could see something whitish outside, but I couldn't figure out what it was because it was partially obscured by a patio chair. I flicked on the porch lights, a scream ripping from my throat as I saw a monster staring at me over the arm of the chair. It looked like a skeleton, but I hadn't decorated my house at all this year. Almost as soon as the scream left me, I calmed down, realizing that it was just my neighbor Jill's dog, Snooky. I collapsed against the doorframe, half crying and half laughing. After a moment, I slid the glass door open, shaking my head at the goofy golden lab who was staring intensely at me. "Hey, Snooks. Damn, you scared me." It wasn't unusual for Jill to dress him up in weird costumes on Halloween, and I was annoyed at myself for thinking that this was anything other than a dog in a mask. Everything was fine, and I had probably gotten the blood on my hands when I was helping my mom decorate her house earlier. She had put some fake blood all over a scarecrow, and I must have just gotten some on me without even noticing. I laughed at the absurdity of it all. I'd been so wrapped up in my anxiety and work that I let the hilarity of Halloween cloud my logical thinking. I called again to Snooky, finding it weird that he hadn't moved yet. "You okay, boy?" He let out a little whimper, and I realized that was the noise that drew me out there in the first place. I went over to him, holding my palm out in my usual friendly greeting. By now, he should have been jumping all over me, barking and wagging his tail playfully. Instead, he just sat there. As I approached the chair, he tried to move away from me, but he seemed to be held in place somehow. I got right up to him and saw a kitchen knife impaling his shoulder, pinning him to the arm of the chair. I took the mask off of him, and before he could wiggle around, I wrenched the knife out of his shoulder. He let out a yelp that broke my heart, and as I tried to stop the bleeding with my nightgown, I saw something else. Carved into his chest, right below his sternum, was the word Marowak. There were blood spots all over the porch behind Snooky, and I nearly vomited as I came to the sickening conclusion that what had been on my hands wasn't actually fake. At some point in my sleep, I had assaulted my neighbor's lovable dog with a knife and carved the name of the dead Pokemon in Lavender Town into his chest. What is that video game music doing to me?